Welcome all to the Unite to Heal event. We are here tonight discussing what is missing, a conversation about social emotional learning. I am here tonight with the Darcheinu team of Amudim, with Mrs. Shira Berkowitz, Rabbi Avi Landa, and Rabbi Yisrael Grossberg. And we will be having a conversation about what exactly is missing and why we need to be paying attention to the way that we develop and grow our children and communities. I'm so excited to begin our conversation. And I wanted to begin with a very basic question. Anytime you have a new initiative, whether it is educational, whether it's something that is involved with our children, my first instinct is always to ask, what's missing? Why on earth is this necessary? So before we even jump in to any description of a program or an initiative, I want to know, what is the problem that your initiative and your team is coming to address? Let's begin with Mrs. Shira Berkowitz.
Sure, thank you so much. What's missing? We teach math in school, we teach science, we teach chumash, we teach navi. We teach everything that our children need to know from an academic standpoint. Who is teaching them to recognize what they're feeling, to express their emotions in a healthy way, to know how to deal with their stress when they get stressed? Who's teaching them to be okay, being mindful, being present, and not having to be with friends or on their phones every second? Who's teaching them how to have healthy boundaries so they have healthy relationships, so they say no when something feels uncomfortable? What we're missing is what we need to teach our students, to teach our children, our talmidos, our talmidim, how to become healthy people, healthy human beings, healthy teenagers, healthy adults, and have healthy marriages, and be healthy parents.
I'm so happy that you brought that up, because let me add in another layer. You know, you talk about this emotional growth, emotional development, boundaries. Aren't we already teaching this? We have halacha curriculums, we learn Torah, we have role models from our rabbeim, from our local Rav in the community. So why exactly is what we were already doing not enough to address these issues? Meaning, these are all very important issues, but aren't we already addressing this with our limudei kodesh, with our rabbanim, with role models, with our connection to Torah? Why isn't that enough? Perhaps, Rabbi Grossberg, you can address that.
Sure. So I think that we live at a time where the struggles are a little different than when, at least definitely when I was growing up. Technology, busier parents. It's not only the fact that nowadays there's a parlor meeting every night, there's a yeshiva dinner, the chasnas, but parents are strapped. Two-income families are really necessary within the yeshiva system, and parents are less available for their kids than they've ever been. And additionally, we very often were brought up to kind of take our feelings and stuff them down, not to feel, not to get upset about things, not to allow ourselves just to kind of soldier on. It's both an advantage and a disadvantage, mostly an advantage that students are really feeling and parents are listening to their kids, but now what do they do with these feelings? Where do they go with them? Some of the, to quote the great rabbi, said that, we can't keep coming to the same nuclear war with the old bow and arrow. We can't keep coming, it's a new age and we have to have new tools to dealing with that.
So Rabbi Landa, maybe you could help me understand better, because I'm not totally buying it. Maybe you need a curriculum and a program that addresses the parents, meaning Rabbi Grossberg just mentioned the parents are at parlor meetings, at chasnas. Maybe you need a curriculum for the parents. How exactly can you teach these very basic human skills from a curriculum? Don't you have to go to the proverbial school of hard knocks?
That's a great question. And you're right, the parents are strapped, as Rabbi Grossberg mentioned. They struggle tremendously trying to be able to maintain the home at a functioning, healthy standpoint in terms of educating their children. It can be strained. And in many cases, parents themselves will admit, sometimes they won't admit, that the school really is there nowadays more than ever to supplement some of that parenting, to be able to supplement some of that education. How can we only supplement some of the academic processes of children learning, math and science, as well as, of course, lahavdil limudei kodesh, Torah and Mishnah and Gemara and Chumash, Navi? How can we only supplement those but not supplement what's arguably just as important, if not more basic and fundamental, to allow learning in all the other subjects, and that is that social and emotional learning piece. Many times in the past, as Rabbi Grossberg mentioned, there would be this encouragement, this thought process, maybe a philosophy, that emotions are more of an obstacle than actually a part of life to be embraced. The Gemara in Pesachim tells us that in this world, we make a tova hametiv on good things that happen and a dayana emes on bad things that happen. The Gemara says in the next world, when Mashiach comes, we're only going to make a tova hametiv and the tzlach. The Noda B'Yehuda says that means that in the next world, we're going to make a tova hametiv on everything we made a dayana emes on in this world. So I once asked my Rebbe, Rabbi Shira Berkowitz, so if we know we're going to make a tova hametiv on everything bad that happened in this world anyway, it's just we're missing the information at this point, why don't we make a tova hametiv on it right now? We should rejoice over even the hard times, because we know ultimately we'll figure out, it'll be just revealed to us how it was really good the whole time. And in our discussion, the idea that came out was that emotions are something that Hashem, the Ribono Shel Olam, wants us to feel and experience for real and with sincerity, both the good, the happy, the joyful, but also the difficult, the sorrow, the pain. And Hashem wants us to be able to understand those emotions, be aware of them, and have the skills to be able to process them in a healthy way. To live in this world, experiencing for real the sorrow at times, as well as the joy in appropriate fashion. And the social emotional learning curriculum is the vehicle to be able to teach our students and our children, the next generation, those skills, that knowledge base, and that understanding that, as Rabbi Grossberg mentioned, in many ways we're missing from the parents being able to fully give that over to their children.
If I could just
Please.
add, yes, just because you said a word that resonated, the school of hard knocks. We can sit and debate as to the whys, but I don't know if that's within the purview of this situation, but the school of hard knocks is really knocking them down, and not everyone is getting up. We, as being on the front lines, we see that, and being at a Mudim event, it's somewhat apropos, we're losing students. We're losing students at an alarming rate. And I don't mean to sound like a total alarmist that things are out of control, but whereas in the past somehow there was a certain resiliency that people picked themselves up, and whatever struggles they dealt with, they kept moving on, often people are opting out. And if we can teach them the skills, give them literally the toolbox to face that challenge and not just throw it all away, then we've done a tremendous amount both for their emotional health, but as well as their religious health as well.
So I want to get a little bit practical to understand this better. In my own life and in my own home, I'm not only a graduate of Yeshiva Day School, and I learned in Yeshiva, I'm also a parent. And in our home, I think the issue that I struggle with the most is my emotional regulation. I could get so frustrated, dare I say, I can lose my temper. Not doing anything that I think is outlandish or wild, but me and my son are working together. My son is 5, and we both talk together about controlling and dealing with our temper. Explain to me a little bit about what a school could do and provide to help somebody with their emotional regulation. What do you do? You have a Marmakomo sheet. If I would have known the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says it's bad to lose your temper, I would have gained control. I didn't know that there were psychologists who said that it's important to be in control. There's no source sheet, there's no textbook that makes this easier. So what on earth are you doing in a classroom that makes this any better? Shira, can you help me understand this?
Sure. I want to start by answering with a quick story. I had a client, I'm a therapist on the side. I had a client come in high school, and she was describing some of the symptoms that she's having in her life, and it sounded pretty much like panic attacks. And I said to her, do you have anxiety? And she looks at me and she says, what is anxiety? I wanted to cry or scream and go back to the school she went to and say, why? Why didn't you tell her when she was in 2nd grade, in 3rd grade, in 6th grade, what an anxious feeling is and what to do? So she's not at the point where she's in high school and now she's having panic attacks. Our curriculum is a complete comprehensive curriculum, every single step for the teachers. What are feelings? How to identify them? Activities, videos, step by step for the students, and every single skill that we teach we have the children act them out. We call them behavior rehearsals. We have them act out every single skill because research shows when you practice it in class, you can leave class and then you're able to do it. So in your example with Ingar, ideally we start in 5th grade. They're doing the feelings unit, feelings 101. What is a feeling? What are comfortable feelings? What are uncomfortable feelings? And notice we say comfortable and uncomfortable. We don't say good or bad because you know what? It's not always bad to be angry. If somebody's being inappropriate with you or somebody really hurts you, you should be angry. So it's not good or bad. We stay away from good or bad. It's about healthy, unhealthy, comfortable, uncomfortable. We identify what we're feeling. We talk about what are healthy ways of handling feelings, what are our reactions, what are the consequences of our reactions. And that's 5th grade. And then we build from there in other grades, taking from that and building on that in each grade level, how to handle your feelings.
Rabbi Landa, maybe you could talk a little bit about, because I know pieces of this curriculum, I'm listening to this now, and I am a believer of that the foundations of your development of your sense of self used to be what we learned in kindergarten, but for some reason it's not sinking in. You have units on this that deal with matters of kedusha, of holiness, which I don't know if you're comfortable. I don't want to use the euphemism, though you do use euphemisms. These are matters about sexual boundaries and how to be appropriate. Can you tell me a little bit, when do you think these conversations should begin, and why would we be introducing this in a holy setting like a school or yeshiva to talk about such areas of like filth?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So first I would question one of the earlier premises in your question in terms of the natural absorption that used to take place in kindergarten. I would argue that while it might be true in previous generations, maybe even centuries ago, that there seemed to have been less of these problems, although it's always a question to ask whether we were less aware or there really was less of a prevalence. But either way, even if there was less of a prevalence, it very likely is more attributable to the fact that there was less of an in-your-face type of society knocking at your door. And when you don't have some of the nisyonos, the tests, the challenges, under every stone you turn over, there's another nisayon, there's another test lurking in terms of a fight for your soul and a fight for your value system, how you conceptualize the world and your morality. Like we have nowadays, the game needs to change, as Rabbi Grossberg mentioned. We need to come to the battle with a little bit more of a thorough approach to help our children. And moving on to the second part of the main part of your question, the kedusha curriculum is just that. It's kedusha. Interestingly, and it should be kind of striking to those watching, the way that you described this question, in the same paragraph you could use the word kedusha, holiness, and filth at the same time. And that's really where I think it strikes to the foundation of what the misconception is when it comes to these matters. These matters may be very private matters, but first of all, they're certainly not filthy and dirty when approached and respected for the holiness that they actually contain. And they're also not secret matters. In other words, they're not meant to be kept to yourselves. They're meant to be shared, albeit in private fashion, in a more private and sensitive form. So the kedusha piece of this curriculum, which is one piece in a very large curriculum addressing all sorts of social and emotional learning topics, is a part that has some potential group discussion touching on areas of self-control, general self-control, building of self-control, which is important, but also much more private one-on-one conversations where a basic level of education can be given to our students as they are approaching the years of becoming an adult, the years of puberty. Why should any child go through the fundamental changes in their body and be confused? Why should they not be aware that what's happening to them is perfectly normal? I've given many parent presentations on this about the conversations that I was then going to have with their children ahead of time. And countless fathers have come over to me and told me, if only 20 and 30 years ago someone would have told me about this and I wouldn't have to suffer in silence with the confusion of, is this okay? Things haven't happened yet. Things are happening. Is there something wrong with me? And there's no address to turn to. And that's the beauty of having a Darcheinu or an RPath SEL teacher in the classroom, because now that's a person
Our path, SELT. I've never heard so many letters right next to each other. What exactly does that mean?
So our path is just the translation of Darcheinu, our path.
Oh, our path.
Yeah, our
Okay.
path. And SEL, social emotional learning.
Okay, you said that so quickly. I thought it
I'm
was an
sorry.
intelligent life form.
So Darcheinu and our path, SEL, our path, SEL. So we have this ability to have the teacher in the classroom that is, could be a Rebbe, it could be a mashgiach, it could be a guidance counselor, but now the children are exposed to them in a whole new way, already broaching a lot of these topics, and there's an address for them to go to with any additional questions they might have, which is a supplementary, huge benefit to having such a curriculum in a school.
I think I let all three of you off the hook, and particularly Rabbi Grossberg, in trying to understand and conceptualize what the real issue and what changed is. Rabbi Grossberg, when you were describing it, you mentioned the term, you said, and technology. It became like the excuse for everything, like supply chain issues. So I showed up 20 minutes late to the meeting. And to me, it feels sometimes like this dismissive hand wave, like we got to do things differently, technology. And if you mean pornography, say pornography. What exactly has technology done that makes our emotional development any different? I generally want to understand better, meaning is it because what technology gives you access towards? So is that what it is? Then say that's what it is. Or is there something more fundamental in the way that it shapes the way our children and adults frankly develop?
Right, so I think that it's an important question. Pornography is really just one small piece of the picture. When we say technology, we mean that the situations, the issues that are faced. I'll give you an example. And Rabbi Landa mentioned the idea of having the teacher becomes a safe person, right? So I'm a teenager. I have my smartphone. My parents are clueless. I'm now addicted to my smartphone all night long, and that's rampant. I'm not necessarily doing anything wrong per se. I'm not going places that are inappropriate, but I don't know who to speak to about that. I'm not going to my Rebbe about that because he's going to maybe be upset I have a smartphone. I'm not going to my principal. He'll give me a hard time. I'll get punished or whatever the appropriate consequence would be. But this is a problem that I can't go to my parents with either. So, we mentioned technology. The idea also that when we're busier with our phones than we've ever been, then the social emotional growth that we used to have, playing ball, just hanging out with friends, that is much less common than it used to be, has now become something that is not just a given. It's not something that we get through our social interactions with friends. So technology itself is not necessarily we're not talking necessarily about the parts of technology that are inappropriate or usher, but just the fact that it's changed the world that we live in, whether we like it or not. We can say that we're just going to check directions.
Because we're busier?
When we're on our phone, we are not socially interacting. When we're on our computer, even if we're playing one of the the various different games that have now become an issue. I'm playing technically, as a kid will say, I'm interacting with friends. If you look at that list of people that are playing World of Warcraft or whatever with me, there's quite a few friends that I have, that I'm interacting with. But that's not interaction. That's not the social, healthy social growth that people have. And I can tell you, working in a summer camp, when kids are away from the technology, some of them have no clue. They're just not used to all this time and all this, the need to be with friends for so long. It's just too much for them. They don't know. I mean, it's, if someone is listening to this and thinking that this is an exaggeration, they either don't have teenagers or they don't know what their teenagers are doing.
I actually want to check my Twitter account right now. I'll be real with you. Shira, do you have something to elaborate on?
Yeah, I just want to add to that, this whole piece of technology that neither one of them covered, because it is so huge. It is affecting our self-esteem and our relationships in a huge way. And leave the two issues they both spoke about aside. I had a teacher in 7th grade, and they were talking about body image. None of her students would ever think about forwarding a picture before editing it. 7th grade. She came to me and told me that. Again, I was so sad that they can't send a picture without editing it. They're looking at what everyone is posting. Everything has to be perfect. And I see the same thing in my generation with the marrieds. Everyone only shows, the perfect pictures of their families. They and their husband always get along. Their kids always look perfect. They post their beautiful gourmet dinners. marriages are falling apart because of this. The pressures people are having, and then the other piece that I mentioned earlier to you is the privacy factor. There's no privacy. There's nothing, today engagements, even in the most yeshivish world, it boggles my mind. It's a whole setup, and people are waiting to video, waiting to take pictures. Like, I don't know, back in the day, 20 years ago when I got engaged, it was like this was a moment between the two of us. And that's how they're starting their relationship, they're starting their marriage. There's no privacy anymore. There's no just us. Everything is like for the public.
So I wanna add in something to the equation. If you want to add to this, you can after. But allow me to add in a really important piece of the equation. You know, I'm a genuine skeptic of curricular efforts, because you build this beautiful edifice and you go home and you'll never compete against the culture of the home. You'll never compete against it. And you even mentioned that, you know, you don't want to necessarily go and speak to your parents about this. I don't know. I think the parents should be the first line of defense. So my question is, how do you build a curriculum and help a child develop emotionally that begins as a school effort but brings in the parents as partners? Unless you're telling me that the parents are being painted as enemies. I mean, they are definitely contributing to the problem. I contribute to my kids' problems. I'm sure all of your problems were contributed by your parents, and it goes on forever. So how do you contain actual growth in a classroom and compete, so to speak, against or figure out a way to integrate with whatever culture is going on in the home?
So yeah, I think it's important to point out that when we talk about, you know, the issues of the home, we're not saying that the home is against social emotional learning. They're just not necessarily giving it. So it works together with the home. The home is willing. I see skepticism, but you did call yourself a skeptic. But meaning that many parents are just, like I said, they're busy. They're parav. They're not, either they're clueless, they really don't know what's going on. Look, I see, you know, students all the time.
So clap on the bima and stop having so many parlor meetings. So instead of an initiative for schools, tell parents enough, one wedding a week. That's it, and you have to be home. Meaning, if you were to ask me, where should we be focusing our time and attention? Should it be, again, obviously in a perfect world we could do both and get both, but I want to understand better. It sounds like you're just saying, okay, look, they're busy. What are you going to do? Who has time to parent their children? So we'll do it instead.
I think there's an important word here, and curriculum. The idea is it's not just a contest. It's not just, you know, a nice, you know, for a parsha sheet about this midah. It's really taught, and that happens in school. We're taking a given that this is not something that we can just tell a nice story about a gadol. And those are all beautiful things. Don't get me wrong. But it's really taught. And you know, I wish we had the curriculum in front of us. You'd see that it's taught in a way that really it's school. You know, we encourage the teachers that we work with, give a mark on the report card, give homework, do things, make it real. Now I know in your mind that might be so. Oh, so then they probably hate it. But if it's taught
That's exactly
right,
what I was thinking.
I thought that I read your face. But if it's taught right, if it's taught by the right person and taught correctly, and this is you know the proof is in the pudding. We're seeing this. They look forward to this part of the day. They look forward to, you know, and granted, every teacher decides homework may or may not be appropriate depending, but this is for some of these kids, it's a breath of fresh air. They're being given a green light to feel the things that they've been feeling and not really knowing how to identify them, that it's okay to be feeling this way and what to do, where to take those feelings once you have them.
Rabbi Avi, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on the whole curriculum piece that Rabbi Grossberg was mentioning. I think there's a lot to say on that, but to more directly address your question, let's be real. We owe all the good parts of ourselves to our parents just like we owe the bad parts of ourselves. And we owe all the good and bad parts of ourselves to ourselves also. So it's not all on the parents, and we certainly can't just blame all the bad stuff on parents. We have to attribute the good stuff too to parents in generally healthy situations. We work with the parents. The parents are an integral component to this curriculum working. I am involved in TA in Baltimore of actually being a Darcheinu teacher, of implementing this curriculum. And a key component in what we do, it's not the 40-minute class that we're giving to the students, but a key component is that we send a letter out to the parents letting them know, here is the new curriculum that we are launching now. Parents are excited. Multiple parents reached out to me saying, can you tell me what are some of the topics that you're going to be covering? I'd like to try to help reinforce some of those at home. Speak the same language. I said, you read my mind. We are in fact going to be doing that. We will be sending out updates every few weeks with some of the key terminologies, some of the key concepts, some of the activities we did. I recently did a poem that's out there with the boys. It also speaks to some of the stigma where you can't do certain types of classes and topics with boys, but if you come in there with confidence and you do it the right way, you can do it really well, and the boys really appreciate it and participate in it, especially if you start them out young in 5th and 6th grade and you continue it throughout their grades. So there's this poem where, when read, many of you might have seen it, when read from top to bottom, it describes everything extremely pessimistic. But the same lines, when read from bottom to top, it describes everything very optimistic, just the opposite. And it's a cute way of showing that we can shift our perspective. The same set of words can give us two wildly different messages. I got a text later that night, the day of the class, from a father who said, "My son came home and excitedly showed me this poem that you gave out and did with them in class. And as a family, we sat around the table and looked at it, read it together, and we liked it. It was cute, it was interesting, there was a certain funny part to it, but it was just eye-opening to us as a family, and we talked about it as a family." That is a 100% success rate in terms of implementation of this curriculum. We do not see it as 100, it's better than nothing for sure, but we do not see it as 100% or the preferred method to exclude the parents, not at all. We would prefer, the right way to do it is to have the parents involved, included, informed, and thankfully a lot of parents are really excited about it. For those that aren't and that are so absent, you can do all the klops on the bima you want. They're going to continue to be absent with whatever else is going to be going on. And Baruch Hashem, thank God, those children are still going to get something from the curriculum that we're providing to them, and I would argue they're going to get a lot from it. And they potentially can then be the vehicle of change even in their own homes as they get older.
Amudim receives many different calls. Almost all of the cases are due to some sort of trauma, be it sexual trauma, be it childhood trauma, physical abuse. We will get a lot of cases just calling for a therapy referral. We will get a lot of cases calling for what we call psychoeducation. They want to understand their loved one or there's difficulties and they don't even know how to help them. So they're starting just with, tell me more about their mental health. And then we get calls from people in crisis. They just found out their child, their sibling was abused either recently or years back, and they're at a loss. Sometimes they're sobbing, sometimes they are whispering, they can barely speak. Someone who is thinking about reaching out to Amudim, when they get assigned to their case manager, they should expect warmth, no judgment. I like to think every person who calls, I think, like, if this were my family member, what would I be saying? What would I be recommending? I think that on every call, because that's the only way to do this job.
So you've developed these two curriculums. One is called Our Path, one is called Darcheinu, one obviously being the translation of the other. And this isn't obviously the wild, wild west. This is under the auspices of Rabbi Brudny, and this is in conjunction and partnership with Torah Masorah. So I understand this is the wild, wild west, and I hope that you receive my questions with the love, respect, and curiosity with which they are stated. My question now is almost to get a little bit more personal, to highlight some examples of what exactly we're teaching here. And I would ask each of you, and we'll start with Shira and go all the way across. Tell me something from this schedule of learning, from this curriculum, that you wish you were able to have when you were growing up. Tell me the grade, tell me what you were struggling with, and why this piece of this curriculum would have benefited you.
I'm very much a relationship person, so I definitely would choose something in that realm. I'm thinking about 9th grade. I came from a small school and joined a high school that had girls from other schools in a much bigger class, and I just kind of remember floundering. I became, the best friends really quickly with somebody that totally fell apart after a few months. Didn't know how to handle it till I found my place. I think specifically, and I think I mentioned before boundaries, but I'm known to be a little bit obsessed with healthy boundaries. I really feel like that's the foundation of how to be a healthy person. I work in a camp, and I'm known as the boundaries police in the camp. That's like my thing. I feel like understanding where I end and where you begin, what my role is in different relationships, how to handle situations, how to solve a conflict, use I statements, all these things relating to relationships, I feel like I would have gained so much had someone taught that to me.
I just want to follow up because you said that so quickly. You said using I statements. What exactly do you mean by that?
Okay. It's one of the things I love teaching. We teach it first in 6th grade, and I tell them this is the secret. I say, guys, I'm now going to teach you the secret to having healthy relationships. If you can get this formula down pat, you can have a healthy relationship with your friends, your parents, your teachers, your boss one day, your husband one day, your kids. This is the key to conflict resolution. So I statements are basically that instead of a you statement, when you're upset with somebody, typically you would go on attack. You call them names, you start with you. You did this, you are this. And instinctively, when somebody attacks us and they start off with you, we either get defensive, put our shield up, nuh-uh, no I didn't, or we attack back. And we say, well, you did it to me last week, and the conversation is a non-starter. Immediately it escalates and there's no conversation. So we teach them this formula, starting with I feel, and I tell them you don't have to sound nerdy when you say it, you don't even have to use the word feel, but focus on I. I was upset, I was hurt. You can't say to me, nuh-uh, no, I'm hurt. You can't tell me I'm not hurt. Wait a second, why are you hurt? All of a sudden she's listening to me. She's not attacking, she's not getting defensive, she's listening because she cares about me and I'm hurt. That's an I statement. And we teach them it's I feel, because, and I want. That's the formula. We teach it in 6th grade, and then in 7th grade in the friendship unit. We teach it in 12th grade in the dating and marriage unit, and a few times in between.
I absolutely love that. Rabbi Avi, tell me something that you struggled with when you were, in this 5th through 12th grade where the curriculum really addresses development that you wish you could have had when you were growing up in school.
Okay. I think my elementary school that I went to through 8th grade did a really good job of using the available resources to them, but there was no, until very recently with the advancement of this project, dedicated curriculum, comprehensive curriculum towards these important social emotional topics. And I think when it comes to something that you mentioned before, basic emotional regulation, the ability to have techniques and skills to be able to properly vent, process emotions, as opposed to being the guy who emotions don't really bother them at all, and they can simply rub and shrug things off and move on. And obviously I did that to an extent, but I think I would have benefited greatly from having a more full curriculum. I just want to digress for a second on the previous point from Rabbi Grossberg in terms of it being a curriculum. To me, SEL, the most important word in that acronym, social emotional learning, is not in the acronym. It's that last word, curriculum. Much to your dismay and your criticism or cynicism of curricula, I would argue that when it comes to math, if we would want to every once in a while have a project from the Math Foundation that would come in and do some cool math exercises, and that would be like 1 month of school or 1 week or maybe 1 day, we would not have children educated in math. It would be something that they're kind of aware of. So the same thing when it comes to bullying, or when it comes to conflict resolution, or when it comes to basic social emotional regulation, when it comes to being able to properly vent your emotions. If you don't have a weekly class or a bi-weekly class where there's a regularity to it, and then not only within that grade is there a regularity, but it then builds the next grade on a foundation that you established in the earlier grade, much like we teach the secular subjects, and much lahavdil like we teach to all limudei kodesh. We don't jump into the intricacies of a Ketsos and an Asivis and a Rabbi Kiva Eger when we are first teaching the children the building blocks of reading a piece of Gemara, of learning Gemara, of understanding how the Torah works. So too here, making it into a curriculum gives it not only a certain chashivas in the eyes of the children and the teachers and the parents, but it also appropriately builds from the foundation up those skills. So while my elementary school might have done a pretty good job utilizing certain projects and opportunities, Rebbeim and Moras all the time utilize opportunities that come up in Parsha and come up in Mishnah to teach a lesson, to teach a skill, but it's much more project-based as it comes up, as opposed to it being a full, thorough, repetitive building block curriculum. And I think that's something that I could have benefited from greatly, and it would have enormously helped me moving into high school, where it was difficult as I became in that mindset of between child and adult, what we sometimes call teenager or young adult, and there's that transition happening. It was challenging for me to both be able to handle the emotions that I experienced when there were adults in my lives the way I perceived it as still treating me like a child, and I would have wanted a certain level of autonomy or independence afforded to me. Being able to handle some of those emotions in a healthier way would have done me great benefit personally. And I think I read this recently, much of what we want to accomplish in our youth is actually going to happen in the middle school years and then taking them through the high school years. But if you just start in high school, you've started too late. You can argue you got to start in elementary school already, in kindergarten, but once they get to those middle school years, if they're not already developing some of these skills, they're going to be way behind in their development once they just enter into high school and they're thrown into that environment without these skills.
Rabbi Grossberg, tell me a skill that you wish you could have learned when you were in this developmental stage.
Okay, going with the theme of confessions, with Gedolim stories first. I was far from the perfect high school bacher. And being, our curriculum was basically we learned best case scenarios constantly. In other words, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be thinking about that, you shouldn't have any thoughts, concerns, etc. about the movies, television, etc., all these other things. And all of a sudden we say, well, I'm really not living up to who they want me to be. Does that make me a bad person? You take that and it segues right into a lack of self-confidence. So all of these things that are, again, it's all in the curriculum. I think that every bacher who's in high school facing the challenges, and we're not talking about crazy challenges, we're not talking about, things that are off the wall, but just simple growing up in 2021, having just an understanding that you're not evil, you're not bad. And yes, of course, the Rebbeim are shooting high because that's what Rebbeim do. That's, they want the best for us. And maybe in a, best case scenario, a Rebbe will understand, it won't. But the bottom line is understanding that there's a place for growth without guilt, growth in a healthy way. That I think myself as a teenager would have taken away a lot of angst and a lot of feelings of inadequacy that I felt at that time.
I'm so sorry. What specifically if you had to pick one aspect of the unit that would have helped your younger self, what would that have been?
Dealing with guilt.
Dealing with guilt.
Dealing with guilt in a healthy, positive way.
Fantastic. I wanted to transition with maybe a few rapid-fire questions to understand a little bit of your own development. You can weave in some of the topics and ideas that you've been speaking about, but I wanted to try to begin to move a little bit quicker. I'm curious from each of you, and I know I have my own answer, what was your favorite grade in your development through K through 12, and why?
For me, as I said, I had a more difficult time going through high school. I imagine that I could have, in a more positive environment for myself, I could have had a lot of amazing experiences there, and I did have some. But for me, 8th grade was an amazing year for me. I was captain of the basketball team,
wow.
which was amazing for me. David and I grew up a little bit in Ner Yisrael, but I'm not sure if we ever played against each other on the courts over there.
We did not. Perfect.
So what's interesting to me looking back on that is that one of the highlights of my educational career is an element of the school that's not part of education. It was part of, call it the outlets or the extracurriculars, the sports in this case. And what I see in the students is that many of them get a feel for these classes because the rules are a little bit more relaxed. Obviously, as a good teacher, you have to have basic classroom management skills. You can't be devoid of that. But with the basic classroom management skills, if you're able to give over these skills and these activities in a fun, more interactive way, the kids actually relate to it more like what you might call an outlet as opposed to just your typical class.
Shira, favorite grade K through 12, and why?
12th grade, I feel like I was settled, I was confident, I had my group of friends, I had good grades, I got into the seminary, I was choir head. Like I had my place.
Wow. That's more than captain of the basketball team.
I don't know.
It's prestigious. Rabbi Grossberg, favorite grade K through 12?
Feeling a little inadequate over here. No, never choir head, definitely not on the basketball team. But I would say 5th grade, but it's interesting. It wasn't so much the grade as it was the Rebbe. And that it had a profound, I would say to this day, profound influence on who I am and even the profession that I chose. So that just showed me just what the right positive influence in life can do for you.
My favorite grade was 11th grade. It felt like I was seeing the destination of my own personal development, and there was something very beautiful about that. I'm curious to hear, just from your perspective as an educator, Growing up, what was your most difficult grade? Where did you feel like you struggled the most? What grade? Let's start from Rabbi Grossberg.
So it's funny, just quite the opposite. 12th grade, I was very unsettled. You know, it was that question, college, yeshiva, kollel track, business track, you know, where I was going. And it was kind of like this tremendous pressure. I felt that somehow at 17 years old, I needed to decide the rest of my life. And probably it would have been great maybe to have a Darcheinu curriculum telling me that I didn't have to worry about that. But it was just the whole entire time I went, and I was a roller coaster up and down. I would, go from short haircuts and very white shirts and everything to the next day saying, no, that's not for me. It was a very unsettling year for me.
Mm-hmm. Avi?
I would say 9th and 10th grade are kind of blurred together for me. That transition, like I mentioned before, being what I felt was unprepared in contrast to the wonderful preparation we're offering through this curriculum. I felt left me less equipped to be able to healthily transition into that particular high school.
Shira?
I said before 9th grade, I just want to say, just quick thing about Darcheinu, the units that address all these things that you all just said and what you said about 11th grade, knowing where you were going. 8th grade, transition to high school, a whole unit about it, dealing with change. 9th grade, transitioning into high school, what are your expectations? Have your expectations been met? How do you handle your expectations not being met? 11th grade, self-knowledge unit. We talk about goal setting. I have the girls do a vision board or a whole values collage of what they see for their future. 12th grade, life after high school, we go through and talk about the skills you need after high school. Just, if you think of all the things we're saying, we literally address each of these topics.
For me, it was without a doubt 10th grade. 10th grade to me was Gam Ke'elech Begeit Salmaves. It was the shadow of death because you're really rootless. You're not just starting something, you're nowhere close to finishing it. And I felt unmoored from any sort of sense of self of where I was, and that's really where I began to struggle the most. You had already mentioned, Shira, a part of the curriculum. You spoke about I statements that really resonated most with you, and it resonated a great deal with me. I want to go through each, and maybe you could have another shot at it. What is one thing from the curriculum? Avi, you had previously mentioned that poem that could be read both top to bottom and bottom to top. One thing from the curriculum that has resonated with you personally in your own home.
I can pick it exactly. It's in 10th grade in the life pressures unit. We have them write out all the different roles they have. So I'll start for them and I'll say, I'm a female, I'm a frum woman, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, we talk about all the different roles we have, and then we flesh out all the different responsibilities that come with those roles. And then we talk about prioritizing, compartmentalizing. For me, this goes back to boundaries again. If I try, they know, I say I don't answer my phone between 4 and 8. That's my time to be with my children. I do work at night. I work almost every night after my little ones are in bed. If we're trying to do 8 things at one time, we're not doing anything properly. Everyone says, oh, I multitask. Okay, so you do 3 things ineffectively. My role right now is I need to be a student. For the kids in high school, I need to do the best I can. Right now, I need to be a babysitter. That's my job. I'm on the basketball team. If we can compartmentalize and focus on each role and prioritize, see what's most important, I feel like we can be so much more effective, so much more productive, so much less overwhelmed, and handle all of life pressures. Because for boys and for girls in the frum world, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure. So if I could break it down, help you break it down and figure out how you're going to handle all of it, I just feel like we're giving them such a gift. And I use that. Sorry, you asked how I use it. I use it in my life every minute. When I'm working, I'm working. When I'm a mother, I'm a mother.
Avi?
I would say in 6th grade we have this great exercise where we draw a black dot on the board, or we give out a document with a black dot in the center. And we ask, in my case, I'm teaching the boys, we ask the boys, what do you see? And they focus on the black dot. And I challenge them as a way of making it a little tricky. Is it a black dot or a black circle? What do you guys say? And they'll fight with each other and get all philosophical about it. And then ultimately, I'll explain to them that you're all missing all the white that's around that black dot. And it's human nature for us to focus in on those things that stand out to us. Pain, sorrow, difficulty, challenge, those stand out to us. The fact that our heart continues to beat and our eyes can see and we can breathe and we have people with decent, good relationships that we can share life with, the fact that we have Yiddishkeit, that we have Judaism, all of these things can easily fall by the wayside in terms of our attention. So we use that activity in order to show that it's so easy to miss all the white, which is much more in terms of how much space it's taking up than just that little black dot in the center. We institute gratitude journals with the boys, talking about such great people like Rabbi Victor Miller, who was the master at every little tiny thing that you couldn't see and feel and look at and pay attention to is another area of hakaras hatov, of gratitude to Hashem for life, for the fact that we exist, etc. I actually have an interesting situation this year where my son is in 6th grade in TA, where I'm teaching the curriculum. And I get to kind of listen in on some of the conversations at home. And once I heard him telling one of my daughters, I don't know necessarily I would argue that that's the smartest way, that one sibling should tell the other sibling. It's great for the parents to hear about these messages and then transmit it. But he was telling one of his sisters, that's so pessimistic. You're looking at the black dot. You're not looking at the white space. And a little nachas point there. Maybe he knew out of the corner of his eye that I was watching, but that's really a powerful idea that I think everyone should know. And I love that the kids bring it home to their parents, as I mentioned before also.
So I know that Darcheinu is used sufficiently at home because it officially gets the eye roll when I say, well, in the Darcheinu curriculum, and right away, here he goes again. But I think that in the relationships, the unit on relationships, there's a lot of talk of being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes, to understand where they're coming from. Before we right away jump to, they didn't invite me because they're obnoxious, they hate me, etc. But really putting yourself, and it's such an important thing in all relationships. My kids are a little bit older. We have some married, some single, and there's a lot of different dynamics. And this one didn't call this, but if we can train ourselves for all of our relationships to always have that ability to see things globally, to see things that not just from our angle, but from the other person's angle, we're really arming them with the ability to have positive relationships despite some bumps along the way.
Now, if I could just add to what Rabbi Grossberg was saying, we utilize sources in Torah as well to be able to bring those points out. So like Rabbi Grossberg was mentioning, empathy, the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, will bring various experiences and incidents from Tanakh, from Chazal, to be able to make those points so that there's this very seamless connection between those very special Judaic holy sources connecting to these very important human talents and skills that we want to teach our kids.
Short of going through the entire Darcheinu curriculum, as we mentioned so many times before, this is a dialogue of our children's emotional development between our school system and the parents. The parent comes to you and says, I want direction, Eitzah, in order to help my children grow emotionally. What is a piece of advice or a book or an article that you would recommend to a parent to help get them on the right path? Shira.
My favorite parenting book is How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. Totally changed the way I see everything. Validation. I think validation, I think, is huge. Again, it's just a really quick story, but I had a client in therapy, and she had a lot. She really had a lot, and a lot of symptoms and a lot of suffering. And she was describing to me some of her symptoms, and I said to her, wow, you must have been in so much pain. She froze. She froze, and she started crying. And she says to me, no one has ever said that to me. I didn't use any fancy, I'm trained in EMDR, ACT. I didn't use any fancy skills there. All I did was validate her. If her parents had validated her when she was 2 and 3 and 4, would she be here? Would she be in therapy now?
Avi?
That's a good question. One of the pieces of advice or a little tip that I offer parents all the time, it comes from my clinical work and counseling, but it also comes from the curriculum, is the idea of looking at time as an ally. Time is not your enemy, it's your ally. And what I mean by that is we almost never, unless there's some type of imminent physical threat to someone's safety, outside of those much more rare circumstances, we almost never need to react to anything immediately. It's almost always appropriate to react within the next few minutes, and even with the next few hours or days. If you simply say to a child who might have crossed the line, this is something that needs to be addressed, but I want to cool down, I want to relax, I want to think about this, and then we're going to have a conversation about it. I love you no matter what. I know you love me, and this was a mistake, but give me some time to think about what the right next step is going to be. Those types of messaging to children, I think, can be extremely powerful, and time is not your enemy. You can utilize time in a way in which it is extraordinarily helpful. And when we view time in the opposite as an enemy and we need to jump in and quickly fill in the blank, it almost always results in failure and destruction. So that's one of the main ideas.
Rabbi Grossberg.
I don't know if I can call myself a Talmud or a Volba, but I did learn and I heard many shmuzim from him. So Zriya Ubinyan B'chinuch, building and planting in chinuch, it's translated into English to me, is the Bible. It really, the premise is that parenting takes two different roles. There's the building, which is the direct, meaning the parent is directly involved in building up the child. And the zriya, which is the planting, is where you cultivate. You do what you need, make sure that it's watered properly, but then leave it to grow as it needs to grow. And it's that balance and that ability to balance. If someone would read it and not know who it was written by, they would think it's a forward-thinking modern-day psychologist. It's there's so much in it, and I suggest it for every parent. Zriya Ubinyan B'chinuch.
You addressed very early the ills of technology. I'd like to hear from each of you, what are the internet and technology policies in your own home? Shira.
Sure. My brother-in-law is director of TAG and Passaic, so I really get a lot from him. I ask him for guidance all the time. I think they have a thing like prevent, protect, like there's like a whole thing. Try to push it off as long as you can.
What age do your kids get cell phones?
So I think a lot of things also depend on the school they go to. Like for us, a priority was a school that doesn't allow smartphones. And I spoke to the principal and I said, at what age, I want to push off as long as I can. I said, at what age do they need to them cell phones? She said, by 11th grade, they all have cell phones. So that's what we did. But in their school, they only have dumb phones. They're not allowed to have smartphones. So that took the battle away from me, Baruch Hashem. We have filters. I go with the tag rules. So the kids can use the computers, the kid's computer that's heavily filtered in a very public space, only when we're home.
Mm-hmm. Avi?
Technology is a magnifier. It's nothing more than a magnifying glass. If you want to do something good, technology explodes it potentially into doing a tremendous amount of good. If you want to do something bad, it can explode how much bad you can do. This curriculum teaches that we are supposed to healthily integrate technology into our lives. It's not something that we just try to shelter ourselves from. Therefore, the way that I think it makes sense and the way that we do it in our home is we absolutely do have elements of technology in our home. Our children use these devices. They do not, my children are still pretty young. My oldest is only 13 or 14, so we have not gone into the later years of teenagehood yet, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But at this point, they do not own their own phones or smartphones or dumb phones. There's no need from our perspective that they should need to own any of that. But certainly in our home, there is usage of technology in smart ways, in safe ways. We filter the router so that every device that's automatically connected through the Wi-Fi and the internet in the house is going to be automatically filtered. And we look at it as this is our opportunity to train our children. The essence of chinuch is to train children to be able to, when you're not around, to tell them what to do and what not to do to make those right decisions. And if they're first encountering things that they most likely will encounter, and you're not around, and that's when it's happening, they may be in trouble.
I always use the mashal, technology is like a power tool. It definitely is necessary, it has its place, you just have to know how to use it properly. And that's a discussion we have. We talk very openly about it. So basically, my kids, my boys do not have smartphones. My girls at a certain age, 11th, 12th grade, will get a smartphone that's heavily filtered. And but technology, we're a family that uses technology. I guess as a whole, but carefully. Somehow we haven't found a way to find a filter that takes out Amazon and some of the other shopping sites. But for now, this is good.
Mrs. Shira Berkowitz, Rabbi Avi Landa, Rabbi Yisrael Grossberg, thank you so much for the conversation today, really helping address and illuminate what indeed is missing. This conversation about social emotional learning can really help individuals, children, families, and communities help build healthier lives and futures. Thank you so much to United to Heal for organizing this incredible event, and thank you so much for the Darcheinu team and Amudim for bringing this conversation to the fore, an important conversation that helps us reflect not only on what our children are struggling with, but how parents, communities, families are all partners in helping build a healthier Jewish community and a healthier future for ourselves and the next generation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.